What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is Dog Talk with your host, Holden. Glad to have you guys here. If you guys are watching on YouTube, if you guys have noticed, there's a little bit of a difference in the background here. Haven't been on YouTube for the past few weeks, trying to kind of get some things changed up, but also been really busy. We're getting to that really busy time of the year where things just kind of get rocking and rolling, and Christmas time is here, Thanksgiving is here, everything's going on, whether it's home life, whether it's work life, whatever it is that you got going on, it just gets busy this time of year. And it's been no exception for me. Same way here as we've been trying to get things back in order. So I know the past couple of weeks we've really been pushing together, previewing and reviewing games from the week before. I'm not really going to review a lot from what has happened against Tennessee this past week. It was a great game. Georgia played great overall. Really good football game for Georgia. I mean, with exception to literally the first play defensively that Georgia had. Great game overall. Looked really good in this football game. Was glad to see Georgia look as good as they did. I don't have a whole lot to say on it. Carson Beck continues to look good, and the biggest thing to me is we've got to handle our business moving forward. We have a couple of games left. We've got clean old-fashioned hate this weekend against Georgia Tech that we have to take care of business, and then we have an SEC championship game that you have to take care of business. And this is the reason that I say this. Looking at the college football playoff poll right here, here's what we've got. Georgia does sit at the top yet again this week. Ohio State right behind us in second, Michigan in third, Washington in fourth, Florida State in fifth. All five of those teams are undefeated, all five of which. Georgia does not have to play any of those. Ohio State and Michigan will play this weekend to decide that pretty much. Washington and Washington State, I think, is who they generally play. They're going to play later on this weekend. Oregon and Oregon State are on the screen right now. So, obviously, if you guys are watching this or listening to this means that this is happening on Friday that I'm recording this. But that game's going on right now. I'm seeing it right around the corner. Oregon's got a lead in this one at the half, like 21-7. A couple of the other games that are going on around the country as well, but not really deciding factors like these. This Oregon State can decide a lot if Oregon State can upset Oregon, but for the most part, you're pretty much going to have Georgia that has to handle Alabama, which is sitting at 8th as a 10-1 team. Then you have Ohio State and Michigan that are going to play one another. Then the winner of that will play for the conference championship. Washington, as long as they take care of Washington State, and Oregon, as long as they take care of Oregon State, they're going to meet each other in the Pac-12 championship, and that could also alter what happens with them. Florida and Florida State have to play this weekend, and then Florida will have to turn around and play, FSU, as long as they take care of Florida, well, regardless. But if they can take care of Florida and remain undefeated, then they have to play a 10-1, 10th-ranked Louisville team for the ACC championship. So there are a lot of moving parts right here. We talked about this a little bit last week, I do believe. If Georgia was to lose to Alabama in an SEC championship game, what happens then? Does Alabama get in over them? There's the potential, and the talk has been all week of if Georgia is to lose that game, you could have both of them left out. You could have the SEC left out in whole, all things considered, with Texas being ranked above Alabama. If they continue to win out and also win their conference championship because of that head-to-head matchup against Alabama earlier in the year. I don't really know what's going to happen. I know the simplest thing is Georgia, beat Georgia Tech, beat Alabama, you're in. Win out and you're in. That's what I've told a couple of friends. I've got friends that are FSU fans. I've told them the same thing. You have to win out and you're in. You're not going to be left out as an undefeated team because there's only going to be 4 left at the end of this season if all 5 of these, or 4 at least of the top 5 teams, continue to win, one of which has to lose. 2 and 3, one of the teams between Ohio State and Michigan, they have to lose. And the unfortunate part for them is if one of those teams loses that game, more than likely you're left out if all of the remaining 4 undefeated teams remain that way, undefeated. The College Football Playoff Committee is something I would not want to have to be a part of in this scenario, looking at this, because how do you make the decision if pandemonium happens in the top 5, how do you make the decision who gets to go in those spots below it? This is the first season. I'm not going to say it's the first season, but I can actually see the understanding of a 12-team playoff this year, because if you take the top 12, Ole Miss is right there at that 12 cusp. They win the Egg Bowl last night, so that puts them as a 9-2 team. I guess they're technically a 10-2 team, I do believe now. So all of the teams above them are 10-1 at this point, or 11-0, or moving to 11-1, depending on if they finish their game or not. I know Missouri, they're 10-2 as well. They're in the 9 spot. So these are all interesting kind of things that I look at and I go, okay, what exactly is the committee going to do if everything throws itself against the wall here in these top 5 positions? This is a year where you see top 12. If you had that 12-team playoff, it would be very beneficial for the college football playoff not to have to make those decisions. Then it's what's happening below 12. What happens there? What matters, because you got a lot of 9-2 teams, and as well as 8-3 teams that sit below that threshold right now. That's where we'll worry about that when it comes next year. But I could see this being a season where it's like, man, if they had that already, they would feel a lot better about what's coming, because again, all it takes is a couple of these teams in the top 5 dropping a game, and it makes it very complicated. Again, Georgia, our game plan: win against Tech, and win against Alabama, win the SEC championship game, and you don't have to worry about anything. Let everything else happen however it's going to happen, because Ohio State and Michigan, again, they have to play each other, and then the winner of that has to win the Big Ten. And then you have Washington. Washington not only has to beat Washington State this weekend, but they also have to turn around and beat an Oregon team who is on fire right now that they beat earlier in the season. But it's going to be for all the marbles in the Pac-12 championship, and no pun intended, also for the all the marbles and the possibility of being able to get in the college football playoff as well. Because if Oregon wins that game, then the question arises, depending on what's happened above them, who do you put in? Do you put a one-loss team of Washington or Oregon in over an FSU who, if they beat Florida and then beat Louisville, who do you put in that position? Again, I'd hate to be on that committee, but it is interesting to watch and see what's happening in this top 5 with 5 undefeated teams remaining here at the end of the season, going into the 12th week of the season as we come to wrap things up. Pretty exciting. I'm excited to see what's going to happen with it as we move forward. But again, I'm glad to have you guys here. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure you give us that thumbs up, like the video. I greatly appreciate it, and subscribe if you have not already. But that's what we've got working there in the top 25, or really just the top 10, kind of looking at the college football playoff poll anyways. So, fun stuff coming up. Again, Georgia playing against Georgia Tech, a rivalry game that really hasn't been much of a rivalry game here over the past few years, really dating back to 2016 before things were really competitive against Georgia Tech. I say competitive because past couple of years, Tech has kind of surprised me, like last year. We didn't necessarily wax the floor with them. We still beat them pretty handily. What was it, like 38-17, I think? I should look back at it. But nonetheless, it was a little bit closer last year than I think most of us thought that it would be. They have played a competitive season this year, knocking off the likes of a Miami team, and also I feel like there was one other team that they beat that they shouldn't have, but it happened either way. So, but they also have lost to teams that they shouldn't lose to too. I can't say much because I was about to make an Auburn joke, but we're not going to do that. Anyways, as we move forward with it, Georgia, again, kind of on the review real quick, looked good against Tennessee. Glad to see what Georgia did to Tennessee, continuing to own Tennessee. Knoxville does not matter for Georgia to go play in. I don't think even if we had played that game at night, that would really have mattered, because by the end of the game, it was nighttime, and most of the stadium was clearing out because Georgia continued their dominance on the road there against Tennessee. So kind of getting into things against Georgia Tech this weekend, what do we kind of expect? What are we looking for? Again, this is a night game. This is the first time I can really remember, dating back to, I can't remember, was it 2013, I think? I'd actually put that question out on Twitter earlier in the week. When is the last time that we played Georgia Tech at night in Atlanta? I don't know the last time we played Georgia Tech at night in Sanford Stadium either. I think that may have been maybe more recent than playing in Atlanta, but I don't recall playing Georgia Tech at night in Atlanta in a really long time. Again, my memory could just be completely blanking on that, but I don't. But nonetheless, we get that. That's an ABC night game that we're going to get this weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, against Tech on the road in Atlanta. Just strange to see that we're going to be watching that. It feels like we should be done with that game by 3:30, and the game should be over, kicking it off at lunchtime. But that's not happening. But I expect Georgia to really take care of business in this one. I want to date back to a couple of years ago, and something that I actually saw somebody bring up on Twitter this week. This is kind of where a couple of years ago with Georgia's first national championship, Georgia was playing like a flu game. in this against Tech. After the Tennessee game late in the season, Georgia had a lot of guys that actually got really sick in that game. And then against Georgia Tech, it wasn't really the beatdown that we thought it would be. But Georgia still took care of business, but then had to go on and play an SEC championship game a week later and was not prepared for that game conditioning-wise. And it does make me wonder, this is just that time of year. I've got a kid at the house that he similarly has been battling a lot of, just kind of that cold and flu season type of a sickness that has come up. And I wondered, does that same bug come back and bite Georgia here? This would be a terrible year for it to happen, but it does make you curious. How healthy are we? Brock Bowers, he kind of looked a little bit beat up after that Tennessee game. A couple of other guys, Ladd, we didn't see come into the game at all against Tennessee. A couple of other guys also getting hurt in the game. Tate Ratledge, I think he's going to be able to come back this week, which is good. But it does make you wonder just how healthy are we going to be coming into this game. Also, how quickly can Georgia jump on top of Tech? So hopefully, and my hope at least, is that we can get into that second half against this game and really start to rest our starters, really start to give those guys a breather and a break and prepare for what we have coming down the road. Biggest thing about this, though, we cannot have those eyes looking forward before this game. Once we get into this game, we have to take care of business in this game first and foremost, because if we come in looking, going, okay, hey, we want to get ahead quickly, we want to take the lead in this one so that way we can rest and be prepared for Alabama the week behind, that's where you jump up and get bit by a team like Georgia Tech. That's where you get that loss before you get to the SEC championship game. And then your hopes and dreams of being back in the national championship conversation, they're dashed immediately. You cannot lose to a Georgia Tech team and expect to get there. Even if you were to beat SEC champion, or even if you would win the SEC championship game against Alabama, I think if you lose to Tech that week before, I think all bets are off. I don't think you get the opportunity to play for an SEC or national championship if that indeed happens. So got to get through this first, but I want Georgia to come in here and really be prepared and not take a slow start. I would love for this game not to be a slow start to where we are having to play deeper into the game, but also we're all sitting here going, okay, what's going on? Which I think most of it, if it is a slow start, I think it's just, okay, it's a late night game. We're on the road in Atlanta, 70 miles from Athens, not that big of a deal, but it's also one of those, okay, we've got a lot we've got to look forward to before this, so we need to be prepared for that. So I could see it being a slow game, but I'd love for Georgia to do what they've done in the second half of the season, really turn it on early and often and put this game away early. And that way, again, just rest, get these guys a break, get them prepared for what's coming the week after that, which is the most important week of the season so far. Well, I guess it's every week's important, but that one means more than I think a lot of us. Not really a lot of us, but I think it means a lot more to me at least than it does, I think, to others when they go, oh, yeah, it's SEC championship game. Yes, those guys, but so be it. No, that's a game that I do not want the end of Georgia's reign and their wins to be come to an end. I can't really fathom the thought of that happening in Atlanta again. So we got to take care of business in Atlanta against Tech before we can worry about that next week. But the ways to do that, pretty simple. Don't turn the ball over. Be effective offensively, running the ball, and Carson Beck, do your job like you've been doing for every week. The dude has not. I think there's been no games that Carson Beck has thrown for 260 or 250 yards or less in. He has consistently, week in and week out, every week this season, he has thrown for over 250 or 260 yards a game. So he has continued to look the part and do a great job so far through the season for us, and I don't expect that to stop here. I've heard the Heisman conversation. Does he deserve to be in the Heisman conversation? Listen, we're not here to win single person. We're not here to win individual accolades. We're looking to win team accolades, and that's what Georgia wants to do here moving forward, to be able to play for a SEC championship. But before we do that, to have 3 consistent seasons of undefeatedness, 12-0 seasons for 3 years in a row, that's a big meaning, I think it is, to the University of Georgia. And then to go to play for an SEC championship, trying to get that under your belt as well, which Kirby Smart has made sure even last year that means something. That means something to be able to win the SEC championship game, because in that 2021 season, Georgia didn't do that. Georgia fell short, but you still get the big trophy, which is winning the national championship following that. But before that, they didn't get the SEC championship, and that means something to Kirby, and I think he's going to make sure that means something to these guys as well coming into it after this game that we have this weekend, which we'll talk more about that next week when we get into it. But then defensively, also creating that creating that havoc, wreaking havoc on the offense of Georgia Tech, a team who, again, Tech has kind of surprised me how offensively they've been able to score against some teams, and they're, again, upsetting some teams that I don't think that they were supposed to, and also then you turn around and lose to teams that you're not supposed to. But I think Georgia should be able to handle business pretty easily in this one. I've got it picked. I think, what did I end up with? 45-14, I think, is what Georgia ends up on top of this one. So that's going to be my score prediction for this game. 45-14, Georgia on top. I think the spread's like 24 Georgia's way, so that's right off of that. That's just a little bit south of that, but I think Georgia will take care of business. Again, I think this is one that Tech probably gets a score late in. Luckily, even when we get these secondary guys and third string guys in on the action there on defense, they don't like to give up touchdowns in this game either. So I look forward to Georgia trying to keep that at bay as we move on through this season. Now, looking at some of the other big games that we do have going on around the country, not only tonight, this week, that have already happened, and also coming up this weekend, you can see the main ones that I consistently look at scrolling across the bottom of your screen there on YouTube. But it's number 2 and number 3, Michigan and Ohio State playing at 12. You do have Texas A&M and LSU playing at 12 o'clock also. And then Kentucky and Louisville. Kentucky could put a wrench in Louisville's plans. They're playing for an ACC championship the week after against FSU. If Kentucky was able to do that against Louisville and give them their second loss of the season, that would make things a little bit interesting if FSU was to come up short in that ACC championship game because of that. But if Louisville can prevail from that, you still have a undefeated team and a one-loss team coming into it as well. Obviously, with Jordan Travis's devastating injury that he had this past weekend, it does bode the question, what can FSU do as the season remains for them? And they have Florida. They're traveling on the road to the Swamp at 7 o'clock this Saturday, so that'll be something else to kind of keep an eye on there, because Florida actually gave Missouri all that they wanted last week in this matchup. Now, I do know that Missouri and Arkansas played earlier this week, or actually earlier today. Missouri there for a little while played and toyed with Arkansas, and then took off in the end of it. I think it was like 48-10 in the end. Missouri, a really good football team this year, looking really good, and they continue that with again, 10-win season, completely opposite of what I thought that they would be this year coming into it. You have a couple of the other big games that are going on as well. Again, you have number 8, Alabama, taking on Auburn. The reason I put this one on the board is because even though Auburn lost to, who was it, University of New Mexico, I think it was, last week, and paid them $1.8 million to do it, weird things happen in the Iron Bowl. As long as I've been following it, again, I grew up in the state of Alabama, so I watched it all the time, regardless of who I was cheering for. But that just weird things happen. Strange things happen in that game. Teams that shouldn't win sometimes win, and sometimes teams that should win smoke them. And I don't know which version of that you're going to get. I don't know if you're going to get the version of Auburn that played Georgia earlier in the season and only lost by a touchdown, or if you're going to get the version that played against New Mexico State and Alabama's going to beat them 58-10. I don't know what's going to happen in this game. But strange and weird things seem to occur in the Iron Bowl, so that's going to be a big one to watch out for there at 3 o'clock. So those are some of the major ones. Again, Oregon State's playing right now. Penn State, Michigan State, they're playing right now. TCU, Oklahoma thrashed TCU earlier in the week, or excuse me, I think that was earlier today as well. Iowa ends up beating Nebraska, another 10-win season there. Texas was up on Texas Tech when I looked at that one earlier as well. So those are a couple of the other games that are going on right now. I wanted to see if there might have been a couple of games that went final last of the night. Last night or the night before that. Yeah, not really seeing many of them right now, but some big games coming up this weekend. I'm excited for it. Again, this is rivalry week before we get into what is going to be the possibility of a couple of play-in playoff games before we get to the actual playoffs. So that's exciting. I'm excited to see what's going to happen as this season kind of comes to an end. Hard to believe that we're already at the end of the season, but looking forward to seeing exactly what it is that's going to happen here over the last couple of weeks. Again, being this last rivalry week of the season and then turning into what is going to turn out to be playoff in-ready games set just for the conference championship week. That's going to be a big one as well. But we'll check in with you guys once that time comes following the Georgia Tech game this weekend. If you guys don't mind, follow us on Twitter at DawgTalk20. Everywhere that you can find us, that's where we're at. Go Dogs.